The city slept, a hushed monolith of glass and steel outside my window, but within my office the digital world hummed with a quiet, relentless energy. I sat hunched, a solitary sentinel in the glowing arc of my screen, the air conditioner's whisper the only companion to my meticulous scrutiny. Spread across my desk, like an intricate tapestry woven from numbers and dates, lay the records of Aegis Global Holdings, our firm's crown jewel, a client whose accounts typically gleamed with an almost sterile perfection. Tonight, however, a faint tremor disturbed the usual calm. My fingers danced across the keyboard, a practiced ballet of keystrokes, pulling up ledgers, cross-referencing transfers, tracing the serpentine paths of digital currency. For weeks, I had been immersed in this audit, a familiar comfort in the rigid logic of finance. I prided myself on a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos, a precision born of countless hours spent sifting through the detritus of corporate transactions. My colleagues often remarked on my unsettling accuracy, a compliment I wore with quiet pride. The initial passes had confirmed the expected. Billions flowing in, billions flowing out, all accounted for, all seemingly legitimate. Yet a persistent itch, a barely perceptible dissonance in the symphony of numbers, had begun to plague me. It was a feeling I had learned to trust, a whisper from the depths of my own analytical subconscious. I zoomed in on a series of intercompany transfers, specifically those routed through a shell entity in a lesser-known offshore haven. Nothing overtly suspicious, just a slightly higher volume than historical averages, a minor deviation. My internal compass, usually steadfast, wavered. I told myself it was fatigue, the late hour blurring the edges of my perception. I leaned back, rubbing the bridge of my nose, the scent of stale coffee clinging to the quiet air. Then I dove back in, isolating the anomalous cluster. It began with a single transaction, a payment of a rather arbitrary sum, 473,000 units from Aegis to a subsidiary I barely recognized. The description was vague, consulting fees. Standard enough, but the date felt off. Here, the sum was almost immediately dispersed, split into smaller, seemingly unrelated payments to a collection of other entities, each with equally generic descriptors. Software licensing, market research, logistical support. A spiderweb of trivial sums dissolving the original amount into a dozen innocuous threads. My heart began a slow, deliberate drumbeat against my ribs. This wasn't an error. Errors were clumsy, often leaving glaring trails. This was precise. Too precise. The initial feeling of unease sharpened into a prickle of genuine alarm. I cross-referenced the receiving entities with our firm's internal client database. None of them were directly affiliated with Aegis Global Holdings. They were independent, obscure, many registered in jurisdictions known for their opaque corporate structures. One in particular caught my eye. A textile import/export company with no discernible online presence beyond a single, outdated corporate registry listing. A textile company receiving payments for software licensing. The incongruity screamed at me. I traced the payments further, following each digital breadcrumb. The sums, once fragmented, began to coalesce again, pooling in an unexpected place. A series of numbered accounts held by a trust in the Cayman Islands. A trust I knew Aegis had no official connection to. It was a loop, a circuitous journey designed to obscure origin and destination, to sanitize illicit wealth. My fingers paused over the keyboard, hovering. This wasn't a simple accounting discrepancy. It was a deliberate, sophisticated act of concealment. The sheer audacity of it, hidden in plain sight within hundreds of thousands of legitimate transactions. And then, as if the gravity of the discovery had opened a rift in my perception, a vivid, disorienting image flashed through my mind. Not a memory, not a dream, but a sudden, jarring intrusion. I was standing in a desolate expanse, the air thick with diesel fumes and the low growl of distant engines. My breath plumed in the frigid night air. The sky above was a bruise of purple and black, pinpricked with indifferent stars. Headlights, like the eyes of some monstrous beast, cut through the gloom. I was alone, exposed, my heart a frantic bird in its cage, staring at the rear of a massive rig. The details were stark, undeniable, a truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m., wrong truck. The image seared itself into my mind, then vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind a lingering taste of metallic fear. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the phantom vision, my blood thrumming with a newfound tension. The quiet office now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. The numbers on my screen, once my allies, now felt like silent accusers. This was money laundering. Not a modest sum, but a cascade, a river of illicit funds flowing through the veins of our prestigious firm, hidden within the legitimate operations of one of our most valued clients. The scale of it, once I began to connect the fragmented pieces, was staggering. It wasn't just Aegis Global Holdings. It was a network, a syndicate using our firm's reputation as a shield. My initial doubt, the fleeting thought that I might be overreacting, dissolved under the weight of the evidence. There was no innocent explanation for these intricate, circuitous transfers. This was deliberate. This was criminal. A profound sense of isolation settled upon me. The city outside, once a comforting presence, now seemed distant, indifferent. I was alone with this terrible secret, a truth that had just begun to unfurl its poison petals before me. The quiet hum of the computer, the gentle glow of the screen, everything felt charged with a new, sinister energy. I had found the glitch in the system, and it was far more menacing than I could have ever imagined. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for my phone, then hesitated. Who could I trust? Who would believe me? The spiderweb of trivial sums still spun behind my eyelids, even in the fluorescent sterility of the conference room. Each thread, though seemingly innocuous, hummed with a hidden current, a low, insidious thrum I couldn't unhear. I had spent the night before meticulously charting the flow, the dizzying transfers, the dead ends, the sudden resurfacings in unrelated accounts. Now, facing the senior partner across the polished mahogany, I felt the weight of it, a cold stone in my gut. "Thomas," the senior partner began, his voice a smooth bomb, utterly devoid of the urgency that gnawed at me. His gaze, usually sharp, seemed to soften, almost patronizingly. I asked for a moment of my time regarding the luminous group acquisition. A promising venture, wouldn't I agree? I pushed the neatly compiled binder across the table. It felt impossibly thin, inadequate for the enormity of what it contained. "Sir, I've found irregularities, significant ones." My voice, I noticed, was steadier than my pulse. The initial investment, the one disguised as a capital injection for the subsidiary, it's not what it seems. He picked up the binder, his manicured fingers turning a few pages, his eyes skimming the summary I'd prepared. I watched his face for any flicker, any shift in his composed mask, but found none. He paused at the page detailing the subsequent dispersal of funds, the list of shell companies, the generic descriptors. "Software licensing," he murmured, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Market research, logistical support, standard operating procedures for a firm of this scale, Thomas. Our clients often have complex structures. But the volume, sir, the speed of the transfers, the lack of discernible deliverables for these services, and the ultimate beneficiaries, they're opaque almost deliberately so." I leaned forward, my conviction a brittle shield against his calm. "These aren't just irregularities. This is a pattern, a laundering pattern on an international scale." He closed the binder with a soft thud, a sound that seemed to seal my fate. His smile remained a fixed, unsettling thing. "Thomas, I appreciate my diligence. Truly, it's what makes I so valuable to us. But sometimes a meticulous eye can see ghosts where only shadows dance. These are established entities, reputable firms in their own right, albeit with a layered financial architecture." A glacial seep began in my veins. "Sir, the numbers don't lie, the figures," they scream. He leaned back, his gaze now distant, contemplative. "Numbers, Thomas, are often open to interpretation, especially when dealing with high-stakes international finance. Our firm thrives on discretion, on trust. To cast such accusations based on conjecture, however well-intentioned, could have far-reaching consequences, not just for the client, but for us, for I." The air in the room thickened, pressing in on me. The "for you" hung in the silence, a bell tolling a quiet warning. It wasn't a threat, not in any overt sense. It was a gentle suggestion, cloaked in concern, that my career, my future, perhaps even my well-being, depended on my willingness to let these ghosts remain undisturbed. He wasn't saying I was wrong. He was saying I shouldn't be right. And it rewards those who understand the delicate balance of our ecosystem. Curiosity, while laudable, can sometimes lead one down paths best left untrodden, especially when those paths intersect with the interests of our most significant patrons. The words were soft, yet they struck me with the force of a physical blow. The corruption wasn't just external, it was woven into the very fabric of my world, protected by the very people I trusted. My meticulous findings, far from being lauded, were a dangerous inconvenience. I was being told in no uncertain terms to look away. I swallowed, the taste in my mouth metallic. "I understand, sir." The lie tasted bitter. "Good. Now, I believe I have the preliminary audit for the Sinclair account due by end of week. A much more straightforward matter, I assure I." He stood, signaling the end of our meeting. Focus on that, Thomas. Recenter myself. Sometimes a fresh perspective is all one needs. I gathered my binder, the pages now feeling heavier, imbued with a silent, menacing weight. I nodded, a puppet on invisible strings, and exited his office, the polished mahogany door closing softly behind me, sealing me out of his world and deeper into my own burgeoning nightmare. The firm, once a sanctuary of order and logic, now felt like a gilded cage. The truth, if I pursued it, would not be found within these walls. The hours that followed were a blur of feigned normalcy. I stared at spreadsheets, but saw only the senior partner's placid smile, heard only his silken warning. The office, once a place of quiet industry, now felt like a buzzing hive of unknowable secrets. I couldn't focus, couldn't breathe. The desire to break free to understand the true depth of the rot became an unbearable ache. Later, much later, the city was a sleeping giant, its distant hum a lullaby to the undisturbed. But I was not undisturbed. I was a restless spirit, drawn by an unspoken urgency, a need to simply move. My car became a vessel for my churning thoughts, taking me aimlessly through the quiet streets past the sleeping storefronts, until I found myself in the desolate expanse of a truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m. The air was thick with the scent of diesel and stale coffee. A few hulking rigs idled, their engines a low rumble exhaling plumes of vapor into the frigid night. My gaze drifted over the rows of trucks, identical metallic behemoths. One in particular caught my eye. It wasn't the kind of truck that typically stopped here, too new, too clean, too anonymous. A flicker of unease, a purely instinctual alarm rippled through me. Then a sudden sharp clang from within the truck, a metallic scrape quickly muffled, my breath hitched. I watched, unmoving, a statue of apprehension. No one emerged, no lights came on, or perhaps watching the wrong truck. My heart gave a frantic drum against my ribs. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to see this. I pulled out, slowly at first, then accelerated, leaving the truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m. wrong truck behind, its silent secrets clinging to the night. And I had the terrifying feeling that, whether I wanted to or not, I was already on one of those untrodden paths. The hum of the engine was a dull throb against the frantic rhythm of my own pulse. I drove, not knowing where, only away. The rearview mirror offered no comfort, just the receding darkness that had swallowed the truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m. wrong truck, its silent, hulking forms blurring into the past. But the image of that opened cargo bay, the glint of metal, the chilling whisper of a name I hadn't dared to articulate, remained sharp behind my eyes. I had stumbled into a truth far grimmer than I could have imagined, a truth that felt less like a discovery and more like a brand seared onto my very being. Dawn painted the sky in bruised purples and grays as I finally steered my car into my own driveway. The house stood, a beacon of normalcy, yet it felt alien, a fragile shell against the enormity of what I now knew. I unlocked the door, the click echoing too loudly in the pre-morning quiet, and stepped into the stillness. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about the very fabric of my existence and theirs. Sleep was a distant dream. The office, once my sanctuary of logic and order, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in. Reporting this internally, I knew, was no longer an option. I could not simply let it go. The sheer audacity of the scheme, the audacious reach of its tendrils, demanded attention. My meticulous nature, once a professional asset, now morphed into an obsessive need for answers. I would dig. Alone. My spare room, usually reserved for forgotten boxes and dusty aspirations, became my clandestine command center. I pulled out my personal laptop, a relic compared to the firm's gleaming machines, but untainted by its watchful eyes. I started small, tracing the most recent transactions that had first raised my alarm. It wasn't the large sums that fascinated me, but the intricate web of smaller, seemingly legitimate transfers, dissolving like sugar in water across a dozen different accounts before coalescing again in offshore havens. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a dance born of years of practice. I delved into public company registries, seeking the names of directors, the registered addresses, the tiny, almost invisible connections between entities that on paper had no business interacting. It was a digital archaeology, sifting through layers of data, each click a shovel turning over another handful of virtual earth. What I found initially were just fragments, like shards of pottery from a shattered vase. A small import-export business in Panama, its declared revenue laughably low, yet linked to a shipping company that operated a fleet of massive cargo vessels. A seemingly innocuous charity based in a distant archipelago, receiving donations from a series of holding companies whose registered addresses were identical. A bare room in a forgotten industrial park. Wait! I murmured aloud, the sound startling in the quiet room. That doesn't add up. The charity, on paper, was dedicated to marine conservation, yet its largest donors were shell corporations whose stated business was agricultural commodities. The disconnect was jarring, a discordant note in the symphony of deception. Why would a grain distributor fund ocean cleanup? Unless the cleanup was a euphemism, a smokescreen. I cross-referenced the names of the directors of these agricultural entities. One name, a recurring phantom, appeared on the boards of not just these shell companies. Also on a network of small, independent logistics firms that had recently secured contracts with a major client of my own firm, a client whose financial statements I had reviewed. Found? Too clean. Almost artificially so. A shiver traced its way down my spine. The pieces, once scattered and meaningless, were beginning to interlock, forming a picture far larger than I had initially conceived. It wasn't merely a scheme. It was an empire built on a foundation of lies and laundered wealth. This wasn't the work of petty criminals. This was the calculated operation of minds as sharp or sharper than my own, only bent towards illicit gain. What was I doing? The thought of confronting such a vast, entrenched network, a hydra with countless heads, made my breath catch in my throat. My firm, my family, my very life felt suddenly precarious, balancing on the edge of a precipice. Could I truly stand against this? Was I capable? The quiet determination that had propelled me forward wavered, momentarily replaced by a terrifying clarity of the danger I was inviting. But then another image flashed in my mind. The unsettling certainty in the eyes of the man at the truck stop parking lot. 2 a.m. wrong truck. The silent threat in the way he had watched me. Retreat was no longer an option. I had seen too much. The truth, however dangerous, now clung to me like a second skin, and I had to see it through, not just for myself, but for the fragile world I was fighting to protect. The fragments I held were just the beginning. The true monster lay hidden beneath, and I, Thomas, was determined to unearth every single one of its venomous scales. The metallic tang of fear from the truck stop parking lot. 2 a.m., wrong truck still clung to my tongue, a phantom taste of gasoline and dread. I drove, the city's nocturnal sprawl unwinding before me, each street lamp a fleeting, cold eye. When the pale dawn finally arrived, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays, it brought not peace, but a sharper clarity to my resolve. The numbers I had uncovered were a truth too stark to ignore, a malignancy too vast to simply walk away from. The first tremor of unease rippled through me on Tuesday. The morning commute, usually a predictable ballet of hurried vehicles, felt different. Its windows were tinted, opaque mirrors reflecting only the indifferent sky. I dismissed it at first, attributing it to the lingering paranoia from my recent nocturnal adventure. Yet at the crossroads near my firm, where I always turned right, the sedan, instead of continuing straight, also turned right, a beat too late, a movement too deliberate. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, grip tight. Later at my desk, the air of the office, usually a sterile hum of industry, felt charged, as if static electricity prickled the hairs on my arms. A colleague, usually a whirlwind of cheerful gossip, paused beside my cubicle, her smile a fraction too wide, her gaze sweeping my workspace with an unnerving thoroughness before she moved on. Had she always been so observant? Or was it my own heightened senses, now attuned to every flicker of movement, every shifted glance? I found myself staring at the closed door of the senior partner's office, a place that now felt less like a bastion of integrity and more like a fortress holding secrets. The subtle shifts began to accumulate, each one a tiny, unsettling pebble dropped into the quiet pond of my routine. My usual morning coffee order at the small bakery near the office was suddenly, consistently, out of stock when I arrived, even though others after me received theirs. A particular brand of mints I favored, always available in the vending machine, vanished, replaced by a generic, sickly sweet alternative. Trivial matters, yes, but their cumulative weight began to press down. Was I imagining it? Was the stress distorting my perception, twisting coincidence into conspiracy? No, this was real. The real disquiet began when I noticed the changes in my home. A window, which I distinctly remembered latching before leaving for work, was now unlatched, though still closed. A book on my bedside table, a weighty tome of economic theory, had been moved, its spine no longer perfectly aligned with the edge of the nightstand. There were no signs of forced entry, no obvious theft. Only these microscopic alterations, designed, I realized with a sickening lurch, to be noticed only by me. They were a whisper in the dark, a subtle declaration. "We see you." Not a mugger, not an accidental passerby. They didn't approach directly, but angled their path to intersect mine, forcing me to swerve slightly. My breath hitched. It was a direct warning, unambiguous in its intent, yet utterly untraceable. No face, no clear features. Just a voice and a word that resonated like a struck gong in my skull. They weren't just watching, they were sending messages. They were playing with me, a cat with a mouse, testing my resolve, tightening the invisible net. I checked the locks twice, then a third time. The street was empty, a deceptive tableau of normalcy. The next morning, a small package arrived at my office, delivered by a messenger I didn't recognize who vanished before I could properly thank him. Inside, nestled among crumpled tissue paper, was a single pristine white lily. Its petals were impossibly delicate, its fragrance cloying and sweet, yet utterly devoid of life. Tucked beneath its stem was a note, elegant script on heavy cream paper. Some flowers wilt faster than others. No signature, no demand, just a stark, beautiful symbol of decay and a veiled threat. The message was clear, my time was running out. The game had begun and I was clearly the target. The firm, my sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. The world, once a place of order and logic, had twisted into a labyrinth of mirrors, reflecting only my own fear and the unseen eyes that watched my every move. I would not wilt, not yet. The figure in the alleyway, cloaked in a dark, shapeless coat, moved with a predatory grace that curdled the damp air around me. No words were exchanged, not a single syllable to break the city's hum, only the soft scrape of a shoe on damp concrete. Instead, a hand, gloved in worn leather, extended from the voluminous sleeve. In its palm, cradled as if a precious jewel, lay a small, carved wooden bird. A robin, my daughter's favorite, the one I'd bought her last summer from the market stall near the river. Its painted eye still held a spark of innocent cheer. My breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in my chest, a sudden, brutal understanding slamming into me. I walked the remaining blocks in a daze, the city lights now a kaleidoscope of accusation. Each reflection on the slick pavement seemed to mock my meticulous order, my carefully constructed world of numbers and logic. The warmth of my home, usually a bomb, felt like a fragile shell, easily breached. I found my daughter asleep, her breath a soft rhythm against the pillow, her small hand clutching a faded teddy bear. My wife, the quiet anchor of my world, stirred as I entered our room, a questioning hum in her throat. The next morning, a call from my wife sliced through the day's fragile peace, sharp as a shard of ice. Her voice, usually so steady, was thin, strained, a tremor I'd never heard before. "Thomas," he began, the name a plea more than an address. I almost lost the car. He was at the local garage, the mechanic bewildered, his gruff explanations filtered through him shock. The brake lines, he told her, had been deliberately severed. Not worn, not rusted, but cut with precision. A clean slice, almost surgical. She'd been on her way to drop our daughter at her friend's house, a route that involved a sharp, winding descent, a narrow curve overlooking a steep embankment. The image, stark and terrifying, burned behind my eyes. The robin, the silent figure, it wasn't a warning, it was a promise. A promise of devastation painted in the blackest ink. My meticulously ordered world, built on logic and figures, crumbled into dust. This wasn't about ledgers anymore, not about abstract crimes of finance. This was about survival. They had crossed a line, a sacred boundary. I spent the day in a blur, my mind racing through the labyrinth of figures, conversations, and veiled threats. A code buried deep within a subsidiary ledger, a series of seemingly innocuous delivery notes: route Delta 7, rendezvous point Echo 9. My fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing, mapping, until a location materialized on the screen. A desolate stretch of highway far from the city's glow, marked only by a forgotten diner and a sprawling lot for weary haulers. A truck stop. My gut screamed at me, but a new, steel-hard resolve drove me forward. Under the shroud of midnight, I drove, the hum of the engine a dull counterpoint to the frantic drumbeat in my chest. The city faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by the skeletal trees of the countryside, silent witnesses to my desperate journey. The truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m., was a sprawling, desolate expanse of asphalt, dotted with the hulking silhouettes of sleeping rigs. Diesel fumes hung heavy in the frigid air, mingling with the faint scent of stale coffee and desperation. I parked my unassuming sedan far from the main building, its engine ticking softly as it cooled, a lonely sentinel in the vastness. I knew what I was looking for, or thought I did. A specific logo, a particular trailer number, details etched into my memory from the laundered invoices. A few trucks had their engines idling, a low thrumming vibration that resonated through the ground, a mechanical heartbeat in the quiet night. My gaze snagged on a rig, its trailer bathed in the sickly yellow glow of a distant sodium lamp. The logo, a stylized hawk, matched the one in my records. The trailer number, however, was off by a single digit. A single crucial digit. My breath fogged the air. Wrong truck. My carefully constructed plan, my desperate hope, threatened to unravel, leaving me exposed and utterly lost. It paused, glancing around the desolate lot before producing a small metallic object from its pocket. A wrench. And with a practiced motion, it began to loosen the lug nuts on one of the truck's massive wheels. Not the truck I was looking for, but a truck. This wasn't about a delivery or a drop-off. This was sabotage, a different kind of operation, perhaps a contingency or a message meant for someone else entirely. My presence here, drawn by a misdirection, had led me to witness something I wasn't meant to see. The threads of the web were far more tangled than I had imagined, extending beyond the neat columns of my ledgers into the grimy underbelly of this nocturnal world. And I, Thomas, the meticulous accountant, was now standing on the edge of it, a reluctant player in a game whose rules I was only just beginning to comprehend. The hand in the alley, a silhouette against the city's smeared glow, offered no violence, only a folded square of stiff paper. Its texture, rough and cool against my palm, felt like a secret history. I watched the cloaked figure dissolve into the deeper shadows, leaving behind only the damp chill and the distant wail of a siren. Back in the fragile sanctity of my small sedan, the paper unfolded to reveal a crude sketch. A stylized rig, a specific license plate fragment, and the stark coordinates of time and place truck, stop parking lot. 2 a.m. My breath hitched. This wasn't how I envisioned reaching out. This felt like being pulled into something even deeper. The desperation that had gnawed at me since the veiled threats in my own office now sharpened into a cold resolve. I couldn't fight this hydra alone. The firm, once a fortress of rectitude, now seemed to crumble from within, its foundation infested with unseen worms. I needed an unlikely ally. The former colleague, disgraced and dismissed years ago under a cloud of murky accusations I'd never fully understood, had always possessed a certain subterranean wisdom, a knack for sniffing out rot where others saw polished granite. He was my only desperate gamble. The drive was a crawl through a landscape of skeletal trees and the skeletal remains of late-night commerce. Each mile marker ticked by, a relentless countdown to an unknown confrontation. The diesel fumes and the low thrum of the engine became a constant, suffocating companion. This metamorphosis felt both terrifying and inevitable. Giants of chrome and steel slumbered, their engines occasionally sighing, releasing plumes of vapor into the frigid air. The air itself hung heavy with the scent of spent fuel, stale coffee, and something metallic, like distant rain or dried blood. I circled the perimeter slowly, my gaze sweeping over the rows of rigs, searching for the specific markers from the note. A blue cab, the license plate starting with KX7. There. A hulking blue semi, its chrome glinting faintly under a distant sodium lamp. I checked the license plate. KX742G. It matched the fragment on the paper. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drummer announcing my arrival. The ground was slick with a thin sheen of ice and diesel residue. I walked towards the blue rig, my boots crunching softly on gravel, each step a deliberate act of courage. As I neared the cab, a flicker of movement caught my eye, not from the driver's side, but from the sleeper berth window. A curtain twitched. My breath caught. This felt wrong. Too easy. Too obvious. A heavy clatter echoed from behind the truck, followed by a low, guttural cough. My head snapped around. The blue rig I was approaching, the one with the KX7 plate, was not the only one. Another, identical in color and general model, sat further down the row, almost obscured by a parked tanker, and its license plate, KX742H. I had approached the wrong truck. Just as the realization solidified, the driver's side door of my blue rig, the KX742G, creaked open. A heavy boot hit the ground, followed by a thick-muscled leg encased in denim, large and unhurried, began to unfold from the cab. My stomach clenched. This was not the former colleague. This was a man whose silhouette spoke of coiled strength, whose presence radiated an unspoken menace. I froze, caught between the two blue giants, between my mistake and the escalating danger. My mind raced, trying to calculate an escape, but the vastness of the lot suddenly felt like a cage. Looking for something, friend? The voice was a gravelly rumble, surprisingly calm, but it held the distinct edge of a challenge. Then a sudden, sharp rap against the window of the other blue truck, the KX742H. The sound was crisp, almost a signal. The driver of the first truck, the menacing figure, paused, his attention momentarily diverted. "Not here, Thomas, you're making too much noise." It was the former colleague. His voice, low and raspy, was instantly recognizable, laced with a familiar cynicism that cut through my fear. I stumbled, caught off guard by his abruptness, but the urgency in his grip was undeniable. My heart still hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but the immediate threat had receded, replaced by the jarring reality of this unexpected rescue. "You always were good with numbers, Thomas, but terrible with context," the former colleague muttered, his breath a plume in the cold air. He was leaner than I remembered, his face etched with deeper lines, his eyes still sharp, but now holding a weary, haunted glint. "Did you really think they'd make it that easy? A direct meetup at the specified truck. That was a test, and you nearly failed it spectacularly." I bristled, a flicker of indignation battling with the residual fear. "The note led me here. The plate was almost identical." "Almost isn't enough when the stakes are this high," he retorted, his voice a low growl. "The other fellow, the KX 742G, he's a collector. Not for the syndicate, not directly. He's a freelance enforcer, runs a quiet side business in retrieval. If you'd gotten in his way, he wouldn't have asked questions. He would have just retrieved you." A shiver traced its way down my spine. I looked at him, truly looked, and saw the years of living on the fringes, the sharp edges honed by experiences I could only imagine. This was not the man I remembered from the polished halls of the firm. He gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "I knew you'd be cornered, and I knew you'd be desperate enough to look for someone who understands how the underbelly works. Your firm, Thomas, it's not just compromised. It's been actively used asterisk for years. That money laundering scheme I stumbled upon, it's a symptom, not the disease." My mind raced, trying to process this. "What do I mean used? By whom?" His gaze met mine, steady and unnervingly direct. "The syndicate isn't some abstract criminal enterprise. It has a name and faces. And some of those faces sit at the very top of my esteemed firm. Not just the quiet partners, I suspect. The ones who signed off on the shell corporations. I'm talking about the senior partner, the one who gave the keynote speeches, the one whose portrait hangs in the main lobby. He's been orchestrating it, pulling the strings, leveraging the firm's reputation to legitimize the illicit funds." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The senior partner, the man who had personally mentored me, whose integrity I had never once questioned. The image of his benevolent smile, his firm handshake, now warped into a grotesque mask. It didn't add up, or rather it added up to something far more insidious than I had ever conceived. My own firm, a pillar of the financial world, a den of vipers. That's his disgrace. Could he have been framed? Or was he simply a cynic, projecting his own bitterness onto a respected institution? Had I misjudged everything? Was I trusting the wrong person again? "Impossible is what they want I to believe," he said, his voice flat. "They bury the truth under layers of trust and respectability. That's their genius. And I, Thomas, I read too good at digging. That's why I read a problem." He pulled a worn, leather-bound notebook from his coat, its pages thick with scrawled notes and faded printouts. "I have proof. Names, dates, specific transactions I won't find in any public ledger, but it's not enough to bring them down. Not yet. We need more." The cold air seemed to press in around us. The rumble of a distant truck engine sounded like a hungry beast. My mind, usually so precise, felt like a tangled knot of fear and revelation. The man who taught me the value of integrity. The man who now, according to this disgraced figure, was the architect of the very corruption I sought to expose. My world had just tilted on its axis. "Why are I telling me this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Why help me now?" He met my gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, bitterness, perhaps, or a twisted sense of justice. "Because they ruined my life, Thomas, and because I re the only one left who's still asking the right questions. But if I re going to play this game, I need to stop playing by their rules. And I need to learn to tell the difference between the right truck and the one that will get I killed." He pushed the notebook into my hands. It felt heavy, a tangible burden of truth and danger. "This is just the beginning. The real fight starts now." The lingering scent of diesel, a metallic tang of burnt oil, clung to the air, a heavy shroud over the truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m. The silence when it came was never absolute, merely a brief lull in the guttural rumble of engines, a deep, restless sigh from the slumbering giants of the road. I moved through the narrow canyons between parked rigs, my breath pluming visible against the stark, pale glow of distant sodium lamps. Each shadow seemed to lengthen, twist, and then dissolve, playing tricks on my weary eyes. My gaze swept over the chrome grills and towering tires, seeking the distinctive blue cab, the faded decal of a soaring eagle on its side. A ripple of unease traced its way down my spine. Then I saw it, or what I thought was it. A blue cab nestled deep in a row, its engine a low thrum against the asphalt. The eagle decal, though obscured by grime, seemed to shimmer in the sparse light. A wave of relief, potent and immediate, washed over me, chasing away the gnawing doubt. This was it, the next step, the piece that would finally fit. I quickened my pace, the crunch of gravel under my shoes a surprisingly loud percussion in the quiet night. As I drew closer, a detail pricked at the edge of my awareness, a tiny discord in the symphony of expectation. The eagle was not soaring. Its wings were folded, perched on a craggy peak. A subtle difference, a minute deviation from the hurried sketch. My stride faltered. This was the wrong truck. No greeting, no words, just a silent, predatory advance. I stumbled backward, the gravel shifting beneath my feet, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't a meeting, it was a snare. The figure moved with an economical menace, a coiled spring unleashed. My mind screamed, "Run, Thomas, run!" But my feet felt rooted to the ground, heavy and unresponsive. He lunged, a swift, brutal grab for my arm. I twisted, fueled by an animalistic surge of adrenaline, my shoulder slamming against the truck's cold metal panel. The air left my lungs in a strangled gasp. I felt the rough fabric of his coat against my face, the stale scent of tobacco and something acrid, almost metallic. My hand, flailing wildly, connected with something hard and small in his grip. Instinct, sharper than any training, screamed at me to seize it. My fingers, surprisingly agile, closed around the object, tearing it free from his grasp with a desperate yank. A guttural grunt escaped the figure as I ripped it away. He stumbled, momentarily off balance, his attention fixed on the stolen item. That split-second distraction was my only chance. I brought my knee up, a clumsy, desperate aim, catching him low. He hissed, a sound devoid of humanity, more like a cornered beast. The metallic object, cool and smooth, was now firmly clutched in my fist. I spun, my legs finally finding their purpose, pumping furiously across the gravel. The heavy thud of his boots followed, surprisingly swift, closing the distance with alarming speed. I swerved between two parked flatbeds, their towering bulk offering a momentary shield. The roar of a passing 18-wheeler on the highway beyond swallowed all other sounds, a temporary cloak of noise. I risked a glance back. My lungs burned, each breath a ragged rasp. I dodged behind a fuel tanker, its polished surface reflecting a distorted, terrified image of myself. He was not giving up, not now. I pushed harder, my legs screaming in protest, every muscle protesting the sudden, violent exertion. I vaulted over a low concrete barrier, landing awkwardly, a sharp pain shooting through my ankle. He was right behind me, a hand reaching, almost brushing my jacket. Desperation lent me a final burst of speed. The sounds of pursuit began to recede, fading into the general hum of the truck's stop, swallowed by the vast, indifferent night. I didn't stop until my lungs felt utterly shredded, until I was huddled behind a thicket of overgrown bushes on the periphery of the lot, gasping for air, shaking uncontrollably. My hand, still tightly clenched, throbbed. I slowly uncurled my fingers, revealing the object I had snatched. It was a USB drive, sleek and metallic, surprisingly heavy. My thumb brushed against a barely perceptible etched symbol on its side, a stylized, interlocking set of 3 triangles, a sigil I had seen before. Not in my firm's official documents, no, but in the margins of the meticulously laundered ledgers buried deep within the digital detritus I had been sifting through. It was the mark of the syndicate, their silent, insidious signature. My breath hitched. This wasn't just evidence, it was a direct, undeniable link. A physical manifestation of the corruption ripped from the hand of one of its enforcers. This wasn't something I could report internally, not now, not after this. The game had changed. The rules, as the informant had hinted, were no longer theirs to dictate. My world, already fractured, shattered completely around me. There was no going back to the meticulous spreadsheets, the quiet calculations. I was no longer an observer. I had to disappear, and quickly. The lingering scent of diesel, a metallic tang of burnt oil, clung to the air, a heavy shroud over the truck stop parking lot. 2 a.m., wrong truck. I stood there, a ghost amidst the chrome and steel, the chill seeping through my jacket, mocking my futile search. The number etched into my memory belonged to no truck here. No meeting. No rendezvous. A cruel joke, I thought. A deliberate misdirection. They knew I was coming. They knew I was looking. This wasn't just a dead end. It was a message. I backed away slowly, the gravel crunching under my dress shoes, a sound too loud in the pre-dawn stillness. My car, a pale sentinel beneath a lone, flickering mercury lamp, felt miles away, a fragile refuge. The drive back was a blur of highway lines and a mind racing, dissecting, replaying every interaction, every veiled glance. Sleep, when it finally claimed me, was a thin, restless veil, easily torn by the first sliver of morning light. The day began with an unnerving calm. The usual hum of the city, the clatter of breakfast dishes, the fleeting warmth of a goodbye kiss from my wife all felt distant, filtered through a growing sense of unease. At the office, the air hung heavier than usual. The receptionist, usually a fount of cheerful greetings, offered only a tight, almost pitying smile. My stomach tightened. My office door, a familiar slab of polished oak, felt different under my hand. Inside, the meticulous order I maintained had been disturbed. A chair was slightly askew. A stack of files, usually aligned with geometric precision, leaned precariously. My gaze swept the room, cataloging the subtle violations. Then I saw it, a small, unmarked USB drive nestled conspicuously on top of my keyboard. A prickle of ice bloomed in my chest. This was not my doing. This was not me. Before I could even process the implication, a shadow fell across my doorway. It was the managing partner, his face a mask of grave disappointment, flanked by the firm's head of security, a man whose presence usually meant a lost keycard or a forgotten laptop. This formation, however, spoke of an entirely different kind of breach. "Thomas," the managing partner began, his voice devoid of its usual booming warmth. "We need to speak." Immediately, the conference room, usually a theater for intricate financial presentations, became my interrogation chamber. The polished mahogany table felt like a barrier, separating me from their collective judgment. The head of human resources, a woman whose placid demeanor usually masked a razor-sharp intellect, sat to the managing partner's right, her expression unreadable. "We've uncovered some irregularities, Thomas," the managing partner said, his eyes, usually direct, now skittering away from mine. "Significant irregularities." He gestured to a large screen where a spreadsheet, vibrant with red highlights, bloomed into existence. My name, emblazoned in bold, sat next to columns detailing unauthorized transfers, diverted funds, and a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading directly to my accounts, my login credentials. The amounts, though substantial, were a mere fraction of the syndicate's true scope, a petty theft designed to look like a desperate grab, not a grand unraveling. "Proprietary client data," the head of human resources added, her voice flat, "found on an external drive accessed through your workstation, and transferred to offshore accounts linked to shell corporations, Thomas, accounts that, upon closer inspection, bear your digital signature." My mind reeled. The USB drive, the disturbed office. It was a perfectly constructed fiction, built on fragments of truth and malicious fabrication. This is a setup. Someone is trying to frame me. The managing partner sighed, a sound heavy with theatrical regret. "We understand this must be difficult for Thomas, but the evidence is overwhelming. The digital forensics team has been working through the night." "The forensics team?" I scoffed, a bitter taste rising in my throat. "Or the people who planted the evidence?" The head of security stepped forward, his posture rigid. "My access has been revoked, Thomas, effective immediately. This wasn't just about my job, this was about everything. We've also been advised by our legal counsel." The managing partner continued, his voice softer, almost mournful, "to inform you that due to the sensitive nature of the information involved, the potential for further compromise, all contact with firm employees, indeed with anyone connected to our clients, is strictly prohibited. This includes your family, Thomas, for their own protection until this matter is resolved. A temporary restraining order will be filed if necessary." My breath hitched, my family, my wife, my children cut off, isolated. A sharp, physical pain lanced through my chest. I was close. I had almost uncovered it all. This is the syndicate's doing. They're striking back. The managing partner shook his head slowly, his expression unchanging. "Thomas, we cannot engage with such unsubstantiated claims. The firm's reputation, our client's trust, is paramount. We have no choice but to take decisive action." The dismissal was swift, brutal. I was escorted out, not by a colleague, but by the security guard, my office door locked behind me, my career, my reputation, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The pity, the fear, the certainty of my guilt, it was palpable. Outside, the familiar cityscape seemed to mock me. The sky, a vast, indifferent canvas of blue, held no answers. My phone, now a dead weight in my pocket, offered no solace. I tried to call my wife, but the call wouldn't connect. A prearranged block, I realized, the depth of their control sickening. They had thought of everything. I drove home on autopilot, the world a hazy blur beyond the windshield. Had I been so careless? Had my meticulousness failed me? Could I have missed something? A vulnerability in my own digital footprint, a moment of lapsed vigilance they had seized upon. But no, the evidence was too neat, too perfectly aligned to destroy me. This wasn't a mistake, it was an execution. My house, when I reached it, felt like a fortress I was no longer permitted to enter. The curtains were drawn. What had they told her? What lies had they spun to justify my sudden, ignominious disappearance? I couldn't risk approaching, not if they had already moved to protect her from me. The isolation was absolute, a suffocating blanket woven of lies and fear. I was alone, stripped bare, adrift in a sea of my own ruin, the truth a heavy anchor dragging me down, and I had just lost my first, most devastating move. The polished floor of the lobby gleamed under the indifferent light, mirroring the hollow ache in my chest. Each step away from the building, away from the life I had meticulously built, felt like walking on glass shards. My name, Thomas, once a whisper of respect in those hallowed halls, was now a forgotten echo replaced by the hushed judgment of averted eyes. They had stripped me bare, left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and the labyrinthine calculations swirling in my mind. My career, a carefully constructed edifice of numbers and trust, had crumbled to dust, a monument to their deceit. For a time, the world outside blurred into a meaningless canvas of motion and sound. I drifted, a phantom in my own skin, the taste of betrayal bitter on my tongue. But beneath the suffocating grief, a different kind of fire began to smolder. They had taken my reputation, my livelihood, my sense of security. But they could not take my mind. They could not unravel the intricate tapestry of their own crimes that I had already begun to piece together. They believed me broken, neutralized, a dangerous underestimation. For weeks, I had traced their phantom funds, peeled back layers of shell corporations, and mapped their global network of illicit wealth. I had seen the tendrils of their corruption reaching into every corner of my life, even into the firm I once revered. Now, without the constraints of corporate ethics or the pretense of legality, my understanding of their system became my ultimate weapon. The plan began to form, not as a grand design, but as a series of interlocking calculations, a financial counterattack. I couldn't expose them through official channels. Those channels were already choked with their influence. I needed to create a tremor, a disruption that would force their carefully constructed edifice to reveal its true foundations. My target, not the money itself, but the flow. Specifically, a series of seemingly innocuous, high-volume transactions moving through a particular offshore account, a conduit I had dubbed the Ghost Pipeline. It was the artery feeding their entire operation, and I intended to sever it. My accounting skills, once used to build and verify, would now be deployed to dismantle. I imagined a financial pressure point, a calculated vulnerability. If I could introduce a specific, carefully timed anomaly into that ghost pipeline, it wouldn't just be a glitch. It would be a systemic shock, forcing their key players into reactive, visible moves. I wouldn't just expose the money, I would expose the mechanisms and, more importantly, the operators. The first step was the hardest. It required a physical presence, a clandestine maneuver far removed from the sterile glow of my former office. I needed access to a specific, obscure data drop, a digital dead-letter box used by the syndicate for internal communications, encrypted manifests, logistics updates, payment schedules. I had stumbled upon its existence weeks ago, a hidden entry point within a seemingly benign shipping manifest. To inject my anomaly, I needed to retrieve a specific encryption key, updated daily from a physical dead drop. Doubt, a viper, occasionally hissed in my ear. Could I truly pull this off, or was I just digging a deeper grave? I pushed it down, focusing on the intricate dance of numbers in my mind. The drive was long, the highway a ribbon of black unwinding under a sliver of moon. The air grew heavy with the smell of diesel and stale coffee as I approached the designated rendezvous. I pulled into the truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m., wrong truck. The vast expanse was a mosaic of hulking steel, engines rumbling softly like sleeping giants. Mist hung low, diffusing the orange glow of distant sodium lamps. My breath plumed in the frigid air. The instructions, cryptic and precise, had pointed me to a specific make and model, a faded blue cab with a distinctive decal. I scanned the rows, my eyes darting from rig to rig, the tension coiling tighter in my gut with each passing second. There, a blue truck, its trailer a generic white box. My heart gave a lurch. I waited, watching a hunter and the hunted all at once. The specific decal, a stylized hawk, was clear on the side of the cab. This had to be it. My instructions detailed a small magnetic box hidden beneath the passenger side wheel well. My fingers found the box, small and smooth, exactly as described. A rush of adrenaline, quickly tempered by a prickle of unease. This was too easy. I retrieved the box, my movements practiced, born of an urgent, desperate rehearsal. Back in my vehicle, under the dim glow of my dash lights, I pried it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of foam, was a single, unmarked USB drive. But as I reached for it, my gaze snagged on something else, something unexpected tucked beneath the foam. a folded square of paper. I unfolded it, my fingers suddenly clumsy. It was a crude sketch, a child's drawing of a house, but pinned to its corner, secured with a small, rusty staple, was a tiny, faded photograph. My breath hitched. It was a picture of my wife, smiling, taken years ago from a family picnic. A picture I hadn't seen in years. This wasn't just a dead drop. This was a message, and this wasn't the right truck after all. The decoy truck, the wrong truck, the one intended for me. They knew, they had known I was coming. My plan, intricate and precise, had just been countered before it had even truly begun. They weren't just watching the ghost pipeline, they were watching me. And now, they had shown me the face of their next move. My wife. The chill of the pre-dawn air bit through my borrowed jacket, a sharp counterpoint to the hollow thrumming in my veins. The truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m., wrong truck loomed, a sprawling, grimy canvas under a sky bruised with fading night. Diesel fumes mingled with the faint, sweet scent of stale coffee, a pungent symphony of desperation and weary transit. I was a ghost in this transient world, a man shedding his skin in the shadows of hulking metal beasts. My old life, a meticulously constructed edifice of ledgers and decorum, lay shattered behind me, its polished fragments reflecting a future I could no longer recognize. My fingers, usually so precise with a fountain pen, trembled slightly as I unlocked the door of the beat-up sedan I'd acquired through channels I wouldn't have dared to acknowledge weeks ago. The interior smelled of forgotten fast food and desperation, a fitting sanctuary. Each pixel was a thread in the web I was weaving, a snare for the unseen predators who had hunted me to this desolate crossroads. The data manipulation was intricate, a dance of numbers and algorithms that only a few in my former world could appreciate. I was not just revealing their secrets, I was crafting a mirror, reflecting their own methods back at them with a subtle, damning twist. I uploaded the final, crucial layers of encrypted documents, a digital avalanche of evidence. These were not mere transactions, they were a ledger of souls, each entry a life compromised, a fortune stolen, a truth buried. This decoy, a phantom accounting error pointing towards a defunct offshore entity, was my first gambit. It felt like a betrayal of my own meticulous craft, yet necessity had redefined my ethics. My breath hitched as I cross-referenced a freshly decrypted file. A single, almost imperceptible variance in a shell company's registration date, buried deep within a subsidiary's annual report, caught my eye. It was a clerical oversight, perhaps, or a deliberate misdirection so subtle it had evaded all prior scrutiny. But I saw it now, a tiny ripple in the vast ocean of their lies. This date, pushed back by a mere 3 weeks, subtly altered the entire timeline of their initial capital injection, placing it squarely before a major international financial summit where new anti-laundering protocols had been debated. It wasn't just about money, it was about influence, about circumventing global safeguards before they even existed. Its cheap plastic felt alien in my palm. One contact, the journalist. A prearranged signal, a string of seemingly random characters, flew through the ether, an invisible arrow shot into the heart of the media landscape. Then, the enforcer. My message to the detective was even more terse. The package is ready for delivery. Look for the white rabbit. A cryptic phrase agreed upon weeks ago, signifying the impending release of the most damning data. A dead man's switch, meticulously coded, lay dormant on a remote server. Should my digital heartbeat cease, or should I fail to input a specific override code within a predetermined window, the entire archive would be unleashed. The sheer volume was designed to overwhelm, to bypass initial attempts at suppression, to ensure that at least a significant portion would find its way to the light. What if I was wrong? What if the decoy was too obvious or the dead man's switch compromised? My meticulous nature, once my greatest asset, now felt like a fragile shield against an unseen enemy. Had I missed a variable? Was there a flaw in my logic, a blind spot in my desperate calculations? The faces of my family flickered behind my eyelids, the soft curve of my child's cheek, the steady gaze of my partner. Their safety hinged on my precision, on my ability to outwit predators whose ruthlessness I could only imagine. The weight of it was crushing, threatening to buckle my resolve. I am an accountant, not a phantom. But the image of the corrupted ledgers, the stolen futures, hardened my resolve. Madness, perhaps, but a necessary one. I typed the final command, a single, decisive keystroke that activated the timer on the dead man's switch. It was a point of no return. The digital ghost trail was laid, the signal sent, the public reveal primed. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the quarry to stumble, and pray I wasn't the one caught in its jaws. The air in the truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m. wrong truck, tasted of diesel and desperation. I was a ghost within the cab, a phantom limb of the night, watching the world through grimy glass. Outside, the vast asphalt sea stretched, studded with the hulking silhouettes of sleeping giants, their chrome glinting under the anemic glow of distant sodium lamps. My breath misted the cold window pane, a fleeting cloud against the stark reality of my gamble. The laptop, a borrowed, battered machine, hummed faintly on the passenger seat, its screen a mosaic of flashing indicators. Each flicker was a heartbeat, counting down the final moments before the dead man's switch, a digital serpent I'd unleashed, fully uncoiled. My fingers, surprisingly steady, hovered over the keyboard, a silent prayer for the unseen currents of the internet to carry my burden. The signal, a whisper turned into a roar, was already propagating, a wave of truth washing over the carefully constructed lies. I felt a tremor not of cold, but of a profound, bone-deep certainty, and then a chilling doubt. Had I truly done enough? Was this the grand revelation, or merely the foolish shriek of a man driven to the edge? The green bar reached its zenith. Done! The data, the meticulously compiled ledgers, the damning paper trails woven into a tapestry of undeniable proof, was unleashed. It was a torrent, flooding the secure channels I'd painstakingly prepared, aimed at the very foundations of their empire. My heart, a trapped bird, beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A distant engine rumble, distinct from the usual symphony of the truck's stop, snagged my attention. It wasn't the slow, deliberate idle of a rig preparing to depart. This was sharper, more purposeful. Headlights, twin predatory eyes, cut through the gloom at the far end of the lot. They moved with an unnerving precision, bypassing the usual lanes, turning directly towards my secluded corner. My hiding spot, the wrong truck, suddenly felt like a transparent cage. They knew. They knew. I flattened myself against the worn upholstery, the rough fabric scratching my cheek. The driver's side door opened and a figure emerged, tall and impossibly still, the firm's principal. Even in the pre-dawn gloom, his silhouette exuded an aura of contained fury, a predator denied its prey. It was devoid of his usual corporate polish, stripped bare to reveal the steel beneath. Such a disappointing waste of talent. My breath hitched. They hadn't seen me. Not yet, but how had they pinpointed this exact truck? A tracker, a last-ditch effort to trace the signal. The wrong truck had perhaps been the right one for their sensors. I peered through a narrow gap in the curtains. The principal held a tablet, its screen glowing with the same green indicators I'd just seen. He was watching the broadcast, seeing his carefully constructed empire crumble in real time. I pushed open the truck door, the squeal of the hinges a jarring declaration. The laptop remained on the seat, its work done. The principal's head snapped towards me, his eyes twin points of ice. You truly believe this changes anything? The principal sneered, his voice laced with venom. A few leaked documents will contain it, will discredit you. You'll be nothing but a footnote, Thomas, a cautionary tale. A footnote that brings down an entire criminal enterprise. I countered, a flicker of a smile touching my lips. I think that's a rather significant footnote, wouldn't you agree? He scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. You think you've won? The authorities move slowly. Our reach is extensive. By the time they understand what they're looking at, we'll have reshaped the narrative. And you, his gaze hardened, will disappear without a trace, your family. Had I truly put them in greater peril with this act? Had my righteous fury blinded me to the ultimate cost? The doubt, a venomous serpent, began to coil around my resolve. But then the principal's tablet buzzed again, a different, more insistent tone. He glanced down, and his face, already contorted with anger, paled. From the distance, faint at first, then growing steadily, came the unmistakable wail of sirens, not one but many converging from different directions. The principal's head whipped around, scanning the perimeter. The enforcer tensed, his hand instinctively going to his waist. The dead man's switch wasn't just a dump, it was a targeted, pre-alerted delivery system. I had ensured that the right ears were listening, waiting for the signal. The public exposure wasn't just to the world, but to the very agencies designed to dismantle operations like theirs. The principal's eyes, wide with sudden panic, locked onto mine. You didn't just leak it. You notified them. I'm a forensic accountant, I stated, a sense of profound calm settling over me. I don't just find the numbers, I make sure they're seen by the right people. The wails intensified, a cacophony of approaching justice. The enforcer made a sudden, desperate lunge towards me. I didn't flinch. He was too late. A sharp command amplified by a loudspeaker cut through the night. Hands in the air, do not move. The enforcer froze, caught like a deer in headlights. The principal, his face a mask of utter defeat, slowly raised his hands, the tablet slipping from his grasp to shatter on the asphalt. The first patrol vehicles screeched to a halt, disgorging officers who moved with swift, practiced precision. Floodlights snapped on, bathing the scene in a stark, unforgiving brilliance. My eyes, adjusting to the sudden glare, caught sight of a familiar face among the arriving figures, the detective I had cautiously approached weeks ago, his expression grim but resolute. He met my gaze, a silent nod passing between us. The weight of the world, a burden I had carried in secret for so long, began to lift, replaced by a profound exhaustion. The wrong truck stood silently behind me, a witness to the unraveling. The cost had been immense, the peril unimaginable, but the truth finally was unveiled. The sudden symphony of sirens, a wailing chorus cutting through the pre-dawn quiet, had been a violent rupture in the stillness of the truck stop parking lot, 2 a.m. Wrong truck. My breath, ragged and thin, still caught in my throat as the first patrol vehicles, their rooftop lights strobing a chaotic ballet of red and blue, carved through the Inkai blackness. Officers, shadows made solid by their tactical gear, spilled from doors that slammed shut with an almost theatrical finality. Their movements were a practiced blur, a stark contrast to the principal's frozen despair and the enforcer's stunned immobility. I watched, a phantom limb of my former self, as the principal's hands, pale flags of surrender, rose slowly, the tablet the very vessel of our shared secret abandoning its grip to shatter on the asphalt. Its demise was a whisper against the rising tide of official commotion. Cuffs gleamed under the harsh glare of floodlights, a metallic click echoing the finality of a lock snapping shut. A hand, firm and reassuring, settled on my shoulder. I flinched, my nerves still humming like plucked wires. It was the lead detective, his face, etched with the night's weary lines, offering a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Thomas," he said, his voice a low rumble against the cacophony, "let's get I somewhere less, exposed." The somewhere turned out to be the back of an unmarked vehicle, the scent of stale coffee and worn upholstery clinging to the air. The world outside, a swirling vortex of flashing lights and hushed commands, felt suddenly distant, viewed through the insulated glass as if through a thick, distorting lens. "You blew this wide open." He paused, flipping through a pad filled with his hurried scrawl. "The principal has already started talking. Seems the pressure cracked him fast. Confirmed everything you brought us and then some." This was the reveal. My initial suspicions, the fragments I had painstakingly pieced together in the quiet hours of my office, were merely the visible tips of a monstrous iceberg. The detective outlined the true scale. A vast, intricate web of money laundering, not just for a regional syndicate, but an international network, its tendrils reaching into seemingly legitimate businesses across continents. My firm, the venerable institution I had once held in such high regard, was not just complicit but a central conduit, its reputation a pristine shield for illicit billions. It wasn't just about exposing a crime. It was about shattering an illusion, about the betrayal of trust on a scale I hadn't fully comprehended. The firm, my professional home, was rotten to its core. Thanks to a lot of very powerful people are going to have a very bad morning. Yet, even as the words promised vindication, a profound exhaustion settled over me, heavy as a shroud. My body, which had been running on pure adrenaline and fear for weeks, began to protest. My muscles ached, my eyes burned, and a tremor started deep within my hands. The careful architect of numbers had become a hunted man, and though the hunt was over, the scars remained. Days blurred into a series of debriefings, official statements, and the quiet, almost reverent awe of the investigators. My name, once whispered in hushed tones of suspicion within the firm, was now cleared, echoing in sterile conference rooms with a different kind of reverence. News reports, initially vague, erupted into a full-blown scandal. My firm, a bastion of corporate integrity, became a spectacle of public disgrace. Images of its gleaming tower, once a symbol of prestige, now flashed across screens, accompanied by grim pronouncements of fraud and collusion. Senior partners were questioned, their faces grim and pale, their carefully constructed facades crumbling under the weight of relentless inquiry. I saw a colleague, someone I had shared a coffee with just weeks ago, being led away in handcuffs, his expression a mixture of shock and resignation. It was a stark reminder that the rot had spread far and wide. I sat in a quiet, anonymous room, the sterile scent of disinfectant doing little to calm the churning in my gut. A junior officer, earnest and efficient, brought me a lukewarm cup of tea. He spoke of the ongoing operations, of the intricate financial trail that was still being unraveled, leading them to other nodes of the syndicate. "We've got leads on the financier in Zurich and the logistics man in Panama," he explained, his voice low. "My meticulous work, Mr. Thomas, it's been invaluable. Invaluable. The word tasted like ash. I had saved my family, yes, protected my integrity, exposed a monstrous truth. But at what price? My career, the one I had built with such painstaking dedication, was irrevocably altered. The trust I had placed in institutions, in the very fabric of my professional world, was shattered. Would I ever look at a balance sheet without seeing the ghost of illicit transactions lurking beneath the numbers? Had I been too naive, too righteous? There was the cost to my peace of mind, to the quiet rhythm of my life, too high a price for justice. The answer, I knew, was no. The truth, however brutal, had to be brought into the light. The world, once a place of predictable columns and orderly ledgers, had revealed itself as a treacherous labyrinth, and I, Thomas, the cautious number cruncher, had walked its most dangerous paths. The battle was won, but the war within me had just begun. The air still held a phantom chill, a whisper of the shadows I had walked through. It had been weeks since the last domino fell, since the intricate web of deception unraveled with a sickening lurch, taking down not just the syndicate, but the very edifice of the firm I once revered. The trust I had placed in institutions, in the very fabric of my profession, lay shattered, a mosaic of broken promises. Yet looking at my child's innocent face, the way their small hand fit perfectly in mine, I knew the cost, though steep, was paid for something immeasurable. Invaluable. The word no longer tasted like ash, but like the bittersweet tang of survival. We had left the city behind, its towering glass and steel now just a memory, a testament to a life I no longer recognized as my own. My wife, her eyes still holding a flicker of the terror he had endured, but now softened by a nascent hope, drove with a quiet resolve. Our child, oblivious to the deeper currents of our flight, pointed at passing clouds, finding joy in the simple, ephemeral shapes. I found myself staring out the window, the landscape blurring into a watercolor of green and brown. My mind, once a fortress of numbers and meticulous calculations, now wrestled with the amorphous shapes of guilt and gratitude. I had brought the storm to our door, yet I had also been the one to guide us through its tempest. The contradiction was a constant hum beneath my skin, a low vibration that sometimes made my hands tremble. The authorities, after the initial maelstrom of interviews and evidence, had offered a form of protection, a quiet relocation. It wasn't an admission of their past failures to heed my warnings, but a pragmatic necessity. The syndicate, though crippled, was a hydra, and its heads, even severed, could still writhe. So we drove with the anonymity of an unmarked vehicle towards a place whispered to be quiet, a town where the rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons, not by the frantic pulse of global finance. My nights were still punctuated by stark, vivid dreams. I would wake, heart hammering, the sheets tangled around me like a shroud. My wife would stir, his hand immediately finding my arm, a gentle pressure that pulled me back from the precipice. "It's over, Thomas," he'd murmur, his voice a balm, and each time I would try to believe her, to let the words sink into the marrow of my bones. One such night the dream was particularly insistent. I needed air, a space wider than these four walls. I slipped out, the cool night air a shock against my heated skin. The vehicle we used, a nondescript sedan, sat in the driveway. Without thinking, I started the engine, the low rumble a comfort. My mind was a kaleidoscope of what-ifs, of phantom threats lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I found myself pulling into a truck stop parking lot. 2 a.m., wrong truck. The place was a sprawling tableau of hulking metal beasts, their engines a symphony of idling hums and occasional air brakes. Neon signs from a diner cast garish smears of red and blue across the asphalt. My breath hitched. There across the vast expanse, a truck, not just any truck. Had they found us? There was this a message. My hands gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight. My eyes darted from window to window, searching for a face, a gesture, anything that confirmed my worst fears. My heart thrummed a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Then a figure emerged from the diner, walking towards the truck. A burly man in a worn cap, carrying a styrofoam cup. He yawned, stretched, then climbed into the cab. The engine rumbled to life, the air brakes hissed, and the massive vehicle slowly began to pull out, turning onto the highway. It was just a truck. A legitimate, hard-working truck. My breath escaped in a shaky sigh. The eagle logo, I realized, was common, a ubiquitous symbol for a major logistics company. My mind, still scarred by the recent past, had conjured a specter where none existed. It was the wrong truck. My paranoia, a persistent, unwelcome companion, had played another cruel trick. The realization brought a wave of exhaustion, but also a strange, liberating clarity. The fight was over, but the echoes of the battlefield would linger. I started my car, the quiet hum a stark contrast to the roar of the departing truck. The road back felt different. The next morning, the sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. My child laughed, chasing a patch of sunlight on the floor. My wife poured coffee, her smile genuine, unburdened. The quiet hum of the new house, the scent of brewing coffee, the simple melody of our renewed existence, it was a fragile peace, yes, but a peace nonetheless. I had spent years meticulously dissecting the hidden narratives within numbers, exposing the lies buried beneath layers of financial deceit. Now I felt a different calling. The experience had stripped away the veneer of corporate ambition, revealing a raw desire for true accountability. I found myself drawn to the quiet work of a small, independent watchdog organization, one dedicated to unearthing corruption in public spending. It wouldn't be the grand stage of global finance, but a quieter, more ethical profession, where the numbers served truth, not greed. My hands, once so skilled at manipulating spreadsheets, now found a new purpose in outlining proposals for transparent oversight, in drafting reports that sought to protect the vulnerable. The pay was a fraction of what I once commanded, the prestige non-existent, but the purpose, the profound sense of rightness, was a currency far more valuable. We were not whole, not yet. The scars remained etched deep into our collective memory, but we were stronger, bound by the crucible of shared peril. Our lives, irrevocably altered, had found a new horizon, one painted not in the opulent hues of corporate power, but in the muted, enduring colors of integrity, resilience, and an unwavering, hard-won hope. The journey was long, the path uncertain, but we walked it together, towards a future that, for the first time in a long time, felt truly our own.